Welcome to Me Reimagined, a space where we step into the impossible version of ourselves, a version we only dream of, so we can create lives we love and the impact we are meant to make. Today, you are going to walk away with a better understanding of what you can do in relationships that make you feel triggered, relationships that feel like they aren't working, even when there's chemistry and love. You'll be able to change how you show up in a conflict, how you see the situation, and how you communicate to your partner. And guess what? Relationships are like equations. You change one variable and you get a different outcome. So after this episode, the variable that's going to change is going to be you. We are doing an episode on relationships now for two reasons. First, because many of you will head into a holiday period where close contact with your partner and families increases significantly. And secondly, because some market research we did recently told us that this was an area where you would most love to find deep fulfillment and meaningful connection. While this episode is going to focus on intimate partner relationships, the three practices we'll cover can be used in any relationship. So when your mother or your sister is doing that thing you hate again, you can use these same techniques to get a different result. The three methods that we'll cover will specifically help you regulate yourself when triggered. Look at the situation from different angles and begin to communicate about what you feel and need. So for those of you who find yourself slamming the door in frustration or shouting, even when you told yourself you wouldn't, and going round and round in your head over the same points and getting in arguments that seem to have no common ground, this episode is going to give you some relief. So the market research that came back actually matches my personal experience. I also want a deep and meaningful connection and fulfillment in my partner relationship. And I was struggling with the same points, being triggered and reacting rather than responding. Even when I told myself I wasn't going to say that or say it in that tone or with that volume, and getting stuck in that rumination rut where you feel exhausted simply because your mind is on autopilot, expending an enormous amount of energy on replaying the same arguments and scenes without end. Arguments and scenes that no matter the new argument you introduce, they end in the same tired place. In my personal journey, that rumination rut and those negative emotions, the frustration, anger, indignation, passive aggression, they actually provided fuel for transformation. So I want to point that out just so that those of you who are feeling stuck or blah or hopeless, that you know these feelings have a useful purpose. When they get big enough, they are the force that you can use to slingshot yourself into a new relationship, whether that's with the same person and a new way of being, or a different person with whom you can put all the learnings from the last relationship into play, or even with yourself and learning to love spending time with you. So if you are feeling dread at going into the end of another year where nothing has changed, or if you're feeling exhausted and like you don't have the will to continue trying, give yourself a hug and remember that this is fuel, because change is possible. I think what we forget is our power. We get dug into a relationship and we think that the goal is to make this relationship work. We forget that actually our goal is how we want to feel. And if the relationship isn't making us feel that, then we need to change the strategy. The relationship is the strategy. Now, I don't mean that we need to change the other person in the relationship, either swapping them out or changing their character or qualities in some way. No, I mean we need to adapt the strategy itself. We need to change how we come together. The good news is that you have power, real power, to rewrite the story of your relationship. We're going to look at 3 transformative practices you can start today that will change your how. Change how you engage with your partner to get a different result. Now, ultimately, these techniques do not promise that you will keep the relationship you have. I'm sure you know that relationships are complex and hinge on many factors. So these techniques do not give you control over the things at play which are not and will never be under your control, like how your partner chews, or how your partner communicates, or what your partner prioritizes. They will, however, put you in the driver's seat of what you do control. You. They will help you show up in a way that serves you and builds intimacy and trust. Now, before you say, well, if he doesn't change, we are never going to find a solution. Remember what I said in the beginning. Relationships are like an equation. If you change one variable, you get a different outcome. So all you have to do is change you. And I don't mean your character or qualities. You are perfect as you are. We want to keep all of you. We just want to teach you how to learn to regulate what's going on for you and teach you how to choose the story in your head so you are not stuck in rumination station. And we want to teach you how to have a conversation that communicates differently, where you share what's going on for you and what you want in a way that doesn't blame, attack, or criticize your partner. And when you do that, will you come together with your partner in an entirely different way, a way that makes you the partner you want to have, in a way that fosters intimate and trusting relationships. So this is where I wish podcasts were interactive, like chats, because here's where I'd pause and see if you have bought into the why you are doing this, to see if you really see how you benefit from doing this work, even if you believe it's your partner who needs to change. If you don't see it, use the Calendly link in the show notes to schedule a free call with me to walk through your specific story and how practices like these can help you affect change, even when you think it's not possible or not worth it. Okay, for those of you that are bought in, let's jump right into the practices. So the first practice is learning to calm yourself in conflict. How many of you have been like me? You get triggered, and that trigger swamps you with emotion. There's actually a medical term for it called flooding, which I find is such an accurate description of what happens when you can actually feel the wave of emotion pass through your body. For me, it often starts in my head and washes toward my feet, though there are a couple of times when it started in my belly and washed up through my ears. In a flooded state, it's not possible to respond calmly in a way that serves you. So the very first thing is to take a pause. And yes, I know from personal experience that taking a pause when you are triggered and that emotion is flooding through you, that pausing is the very last thing you want to do. And that's because cortisol is running amok in your system, triggering your fight or flight, both of which are very active responses. So that's actually why I am proposing that we do the opposite, because we want to break the fight or flight response. In that state, it's too easy to snap, defend, retreat, or do the thing you always do, which makes the situation worse. So the first step in calming yourself in conflict is to create the pause. And to create the pause, you must take yourself off the track that you usually head down. To do that, you must either close your eyes, leave the room, or turn and focus very intently on a pre-planned visual, whether that's an image in your mind or the motif in the wallpaper. This very concretely gives you the pause, and it breaks the cycle. Now, you can go a step further and do Tony Robbins' trick, which is to stick your finger up your nose or slap your hand when you do it. Essentially, he calls that neuroassociative conditioning. You're breaking a pattern and you are creating a new neural pathway. So his tricks of the finger in the nose or the hand slap or whatever action that you want to use helps interrupt the pattern. So step 2, after you've created the pause, is to breathe. If you have space to do breath work, that is what I most recommend. On the days I feel overwhelmed or tired or deeply triggered, I do breath work 3 or 4 times a day, because that's what this work is about. It's not about never being triggered again. It is about responding, doing it differently. And in just 5 or 10 minutes, you can literally shift your state doing breath work in the most amazing way and feel so much calmer. If you don't have 5 or 10 minutes, take at least 5 deep breaths of 5 counts in through your nose and 10 counts out through pursed lips. That's a total of about a minute and a half. But in that minute and a half, you will turn off the fight or flight response and you will activate your rest and digest system. You cannot breathe like this if you are fleeing a tiger. So it's a physical signal for your body that you are not under threat. So then the third step is about focus. So the focus portion of this practice takes you further out of the pattern that you habitually run. It gets your mind to switch out of the neural pathway that is telling your body to respond by fighting or fleeing. So when you are out of the room or have your eyes closed or focused on a different visual than the trigger, which may be your partner or may just be the muddy footprints that he left all over the floor, then you want to very intentionally turn all of your attention to your feet. Now, notice the emphasis on all. I say all because how many times are you doing 3 things at once? Your mind is so multifunctional, which is great until that autopilot is undermining your best attempt to reroute it. So make sure it's all of your attention and focus it on your feet. Feel the shape of your feet in your mind. Feel how they press down into your shoes or the carpet. Feel the coolness of the bare floor or the texture of your socks squished between your toes. After a full minute of that, switch from sensation to pressure. For another full minute, feel the pressure of your body pushing your feet into the floor. Feel the downward force you exert. And then focus on the upward force of the floor or the ground supporting you, pushing back against your feet. Play with that, flipping between upward and downward force. Okay, so that's the first technique, to pause so that you can calm your state and break your pattern of fight or flight. This puts you in a space where you can respond rather than react. Now, the second thing to do is expand your perspective. When you're triggered and your fight or flight response turns on, your vision actually narrows. Your worldview becomes very small. And this is to protect you. When you're being chased by a lion, you don't want to be noticing the beautiful flowers and considering if you want to stop and smell them. When your brain senses a threat, it sends a message to your body to respond quickly, sometimes before your brain's visual centers are able to fully process what's occurring. It's called tunnel vision. You actually lose situational awareness of what is going on. And they've shown that this happens a lot with situations of chronic stress. So hello, when your partner does or doesn't do that thing again, the ongoing stress of it narrows your focus to only that. So when you focus on your feet, you break that. And that sets you up to be able to come back to the bigger picture. Now you are ready to play with your perspective. And this makes you able to see the story that you're telling yourself and decide what story helps you respond the way that you want. So the second step is to play with your perspective. Most often you get stuck in the story that your partner is the problem or that things will never change. He always or never does X, Y, or Z. But that black and white, inflexible, permanent view doesn't help you inhabit a new way of being. It doesn't help you change how you show up. Now, Byron Katie, an American author and speaker, developed a method of self-inquiry that helps you shift perspective. Her 4 questions offer a powerful way to change how you see a situation so you can adopt new responses. The questions, and we'll put these in the show notes, are: is it true? Can you absolutely know it's true? How do you react when you believe that thought? And who would you be without that thought? So to illustrate this, I'll use an example of a former client who I'll call Luis. Luis wanted her partner to communicate better. He never remembered to tell her about basic logistics, much less what he felt about things. One evening, when he didn't show up for dinner, Luis called him. He was at a work event that he had forgotten to tell her about. She hung up on him. In that moment, she felt absolute rage that he hadn't even considered that she would make dinner or cared that she would be wondering where he was. The story she told herself was a worst-case scenario about both of them. He was a thoughtless, insensitive, selfish, an outright jerk who didn't care, though I'm censoring what she actually called him. And she was someone who wasn't important, who didn't matter enough to her husband to warrant consideration. She felt powerless to change the situation, and her story told her she was a victim. So we dug into that to see if she could get a different outcome. I asked her to use Byron Katie's 4 questions. First, I had her formulate the main thought of the story, which was, my husband doesn't care and is a thoughtless jerk. I asked her if she knew this was true. Well, of course it's true, she responded immediately. I have evidence. He had a work event and he didn't tell me about it, and he left me sitting alone at the table with a cold meal. He's an asshole. That was much closer to her regular language. I asked her if she could absolutely know it was true. And we played with this one a bit because she was really committed to believing the worst about both of them. It's been true in my experience too. When the negative feelings are so intense and they feel so bloody awful, you want a story that makes sense of them, that gives them meaning. And you don't want to let it go because you're afraid you won't be able to get your need met, which in Luis's case, we figured out was understanding, consideration, communication, and reassurance that she mattered to him. She was afraid that if she let go of that story, she would forever be stuck with a situation that left her feeling powerless and unimportant. But as we explored it, we saw that this story was actually keeping her stuck in those feelings. Eventually, after quite a bit of discussion, we got to a place where she admitted that maybe he was overwhelmed with all there was to do, and he was often in his own head, harshly reenacting his performance at work. She grudgingly admitted that maybe her original statement that he didn't care and is a thoughtless jerk, maybe that could be wrong. And that maybe when his focus was on how he felt he was failing and how overwhelmed he was with all there was to do, that maybe it was this that affected his capacity for organization, and that it had nothing to do with how much she mattered to him. In the end, while she still had a strong suspicion that her initial statement was correct, there was potentially at least one other story that could be true. So she conceded that she couldn't absolutely know her initial statement was the truth of the matter. What you're trying to do here is not prove that another assumption is true. What you are trying to do is introduce the fact that you don't know. You only have a 50% chance of being right. So if you only have a 50% chance of any of these stories being right, you can pick the one that helps you respond in a way that works for, not against you. A way that helps you rather than keeping you stuck in a story of powerless anger and resentment. Moving to question 3, I asked Luis how that thought caused her to react. And she acknowledged that this story made her withdraw and ignore her husband, turning her attention to him only to make cutting remarks for probably up to about a week after each incident. And she spent that time in rumination station, thinking the thoughts that he was a jerk and she wasn't important over and over again. So I asked her a version of the 4th question. What would change if you didn't have that thought? She could see that if she ditched the idea that he didn't care, then to explain the situation, she would have to see him as overwhelmed. That drew a lot more empathy out of her. It also meant that she would have to see herself as lonely rather than as unimportant. She realized that with this story, she would respond very differently and have a very different conversation with him. Even what she would want to ask for would change. Instead of asking him to stop being an asshole, her favorite word for him in that moment of pain, she would ask him if he was overwhelmed and how she could support that. She would also be able to tell him that she was lonely and that she missed him, and ask to think about how they could connect better. And this is what I mean about changing one variable, you, in the relationship equation. You get a different outcome. Luis's husband responded much differently than he had in the past when she reacted by ignoring and criticizing. In fact, she said he was shocked when he got a positive response the next time he forgot to tell her about his schedule. He softened and apologized and let her know how important she was, which was exactly the reassurance she wanted. They set up a shared calendar that they walked through together once a week on Sunday nights, and that helped reduce the miscommunication. And they agreed to spend 10 minutes a day meeting each other's needs. For Louise, that was checking in on how overwhelmed her partner felt and just holding space. For him, that looked like updating that calendar and telling Louise how much he appreciated her. Now, the third technique is to change how you communicate in the moment that you're triggered. Remember, first you calm yourself, and then you can use techniques 2 and 3. In technique 3, we're going to communicate using the SOW technique. SOW is spelled S-E-W. So using Katie Byron's technique, step number 2, you're able to understand what you feel and what you need and how the story you tell yourself impacts your feelings and influences your reaction. Once you're calm and clear about what's going on for you, it's time to share that experience. So Dr. Julia Colwell has a SOW technique, and it's simple, but it's really profound. I'll put a link to her process in the show notes. So the first part of it is sensation. So is S-E-W, sensation. You start with what you're sensing in your body. For example, I'm sensing tightness in my chest. Then you name the emotion, that's the E, that this sensation is tied to. So tightness in my chest tells me that I feel anxious. And then you end with a clear request. That's the W. What is it that you want? What would make the anxiety go away? In Louise's example that we just walked through, she had understood she felt lonely. So her request was, I want to feel more connected. Can we spend some time together without distractions? This approach helps you practice connecting sensations to feelings and understand what is going on for you somatically. It also stops the blame game of labeling or assigning responsibility for your emotions to your partner. You are a jerk that never bothers to tell me when you are coming home, you make me feel X. It assigns a physical sensation to the emotion rather than to a fault of your partner. And it ends with a clear request that helps you meet your need. In the example I just gave, the sensation of tightness in the chest indicated anxiety. So the question that directs the want or the request that you will make is, how could that anxiety be alleviated? In Louise's case, verbal reassurance, collaboration in trying to better communicate were what reduced the anxiety in her experience. In the SOW technique, you use the emotion that you name, and typically it's pretty easy to say what would give you relief because it's usually the opposite of what is happening. Now, if as you practice these techniques, you want support tailoring them to specific situations or troubleshooting if you get stuck, use the Calendly link in the show notes or on my website at meganwarrencoaching.com to schedule a call. I hope these 3 techniques work as well for you as they have for me and the clients that I've used them with. As you interrupt your patterns and try out these techniques, give yourself grace. This episode was chock full of things to practice, and each piece takes time to fully integrate. It's not an overnight miracle, but with sustained practice, these techniques will transform your relationship and how you feel about your life with that person. Now, in the beginning, I said it may not guarantee that you'll be able to create what you want with the person that you're with, but they will set you free to be at choice for how you want to get your need met. They will guarantee that if you master them, you will be able to handle the situation with grace and kindness. They will also give you skills that you need to foster intimacy and trust in any relationship. And they give you the ability to deepen the relationship with yourself, better understanding what you feel and need. Today, I am grateful for the fog. It has blanketed the city and feels almost mystical. It interrupts how I see the city and reminds me that softness is possible. I also feel grateful for adventure. I am going to Norway for the holidays, and it feels as if we're getting closer to Santa. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear about your experience with these 3 methods. If you want to be witnessed or find support, Join the Me Reimagined Facebook group and drop a comment. If you found this episode interesting or useful, there are 3 low-effort, high-impact ways you can support us. Follow and then rate the podcast. Leave us some stars. And also, if you know anybody who's working on their relationship, share this episode. You can find all episodes of Me Reimagined on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you leave a voice note or a comment, I'll reply. With love, until next time.
You do not carry this all alone. No, you do not carry this all alone. This is way too big for you to carry this on your own. So you do not carry this all alone.